أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الذين آتيناهم الكتاب من قبله هم به يؤمنون وإذا يتلى عليهم قالوا آمنا به إنه الحق من ربنا إنا كنا من قبله مسلمين أولئك يؤتون أجرهم مرتين بما صبروا ويدرؤون بالحسنة السيئة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون وإذا سمعوا اللغو أعرضوا عنه وقالوا لنا أعمالنا ولكم أعمالكم سلام عليكم لا نبتغي الجاهلين إنك لا تهدي من أحببت ولكن الله يهدي من يشاء وهو أعلم بالمهتدين.
And in English that translates to those to whom we gave the scripture before believe in it, and when it is recited to them say, we believe in it, it is the truth from our Lord. Before it came we had already devoted ourselves to him. They will be given their rewards twice over because they are steadfast. Repel evil with good, give to others out of what we have provided for them, and turn away whenever they hear frivolous talk, saying, we have our deeds and you have yours. Peace be with you. We do not seek the company of ignorant people. You, Prophet, cannot guide everyone you love to the truth. It is God who guides whoever he will. He knows best those who will follow guidance. The format of the talk today will begin with the talk, after which there will be a chance for you to comment and question. There are also small pieces of paper for you to write questions on if you feel uncomfortable talking out loud, and then afterwards, after the Q&A session, we'll have hot stacks. So, a brief introduction to Dr. Chris Allen. Dr. Chris Allen is a research fellow in the Institute of Applied Social Studies School of Social Policy at the University of Birmingham. For the past decade, he has been at the forefront of academic research into the phenomenon of Islamophobia. Having completed his Arts and Humanities Research Council-funded doctoral studies that explored the discourse and theory of the phenomenon in the Theology Department at Birmingham, he has since gone on to work closely with a number of different partners and institutions, including the House of Lords Select Committee on Religious Offences, the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Islamophobia and Anti-Muslim Hate Crime, the Centre for European Policy Studies, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the European Commission on Security Issues in Europe, and the Greater London Authority, amongst others. And in 2010, Ashgate published Allen's monograph entitled Islamophobia. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Chris Allen up for his talk.
Good evening everyone. First off, thanks to everyone, especially the Islamic Society, for inviting me up here. I'm originally from London. I was just saying that actually driving this far up the country gives me a little bit of a nosebleed when you get a certain distance. I thought I was up north when I was in Birmingham, and travelling all this way, it's kind of like makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. So if while I'm getting my bearings at the start, please bear with me. It's always interesting when people introduce me in those sort of formal ways. Is that I don't really recognise myself or identify myself with that. But what's interesting about this year is that it's kind of like it's a really interesting year for me, because it's actually 10 years since I started looking at the issue of Islamophobia in a serious way, and in that 10 years, in a lot of ways things have changed, and we'll touch upon some of that in the presentation. But also some of the things haven't changed. We still are in a situation where I don't think people take the issue of Islamophobia seriously. I think that we dismiss it very easily, and I think that we're still living in a period of time where 10 years on, the events of 9/11 still overshadow a lot of the things that we're actually sort of seeing and what are unfolding at the moment. With that, that gives me a perfect chance to not only plug my book that's out at the moment, Islamophobia, which everybody can purchase this evening at a reduced rate of £10 rather than £16.99, but also the fact that later this year I've got another book coming out, which is it's a 10-year reflection on 9/11, and it's a look back over a decade of what I call urgent history. And I was just talking to one of the members of the audience about this, and really, you know, since 9/11, my first piece of research was done for the EU Parliament after 9/11, and I was looking at the Islamophobic backlash across the 15 EU countries as it was at the time. And we were called in to do this kind of a month, you know, like, well, literally within 2 weeks of the events of 9/11. It was like, right, we need some research done on this issue. And what was interesting was that they wanted us to kind of give them the solution to the problem that they saw. And of course you can't do that. And you know, if we look back now at things such as the Holocaust, 60 years on, 70 years on, we don't really understand it. We don't really understand what motivated these individuals to do something like this. We look back on history, and history gives us that period of time to look back. And so I think that even with 9/11, we're still in that period of urgent history. You know, we're still trying to find these solutions. We still think we know the answers to everything. And actually, like, you know, we're still in that period. So the book actually is a 10-year reflection, and it's got a lot of different contributors from a lot of different perspectives looking at this this decade of what I call urgent history. But that's enough of the plug-in for now. So let's get on. So the first thing is that I understand it's Islam Awareness Week. My PhD is actually in Islamic Studies, which is a kind of a bit of an anomaly, because actually when the Quran recital was made earlier, I don't understand Arabic. I don't really know understand the Quran, so actually theologically you're not going to get much from me this evening in terms of learning about Islam. Hopefully though, what I can do is I can raise some of the issues that Muslim communities face at the moment in Britain, and not just in Britain, but you know, Europe, and much wider than that as well. And also some of the issues that if any of you are non-Muslim here and just looking, I'm making a very quick assumption that some of you are not Muslim. I think that it's a really important issue for some of the non-Muslims and for all of us in society, whatever our backgrounds or differences are, that this is a really key issue in society at the moment. Also, one other thing I would just say is that I'm very happy to take questions at the end. I tend not to shy away from questions. I receive hate mail from the EDL and the BNP, so I can probably put up with most questions that are going to be put my way at the moment. So if you've got any questions, feel free to answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you the truth, I don't know the answer. But you know, I'll try and address as best I can. Okay, so let's just go back. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So the talk is called "Who's Afraid of Islamophobia?" and the title really is quite interesting in itself, because it's like, we might say who's afraid of Muslims, or who's afraid of Islam, or who's afraid of something else. But why are we afraid of Islamophobia? And I think that's a question that holds up itself. You know, with 10 years experience doing this, I think we are afraid of Islamophobia. So with the presentation, hopefully I'll try and explain some of that. One of the first things that people always say to me is does Islamophobia exist? Is it a real phenomenon? I was in November 2009. I was invited to European Parliament again, and does anyone know Douglas Murray? Does anyone know Douglas Murray? Centre for Policy, Social Cohesion. Centre for Social Cohesion. And it was interesting because we was on a debate. We was on this nice big panel, and it was all experts from different countries and Douglas Murray, which is a bit nasty too, actually. But so we're sitting there, and we're talking about the event was called something like Muslim identity or European identity. You know, can the two coexist? And my experience is I live in Birmingham, and actually there's plenty of Muslims that are Brummies, and you know, I don't really see why we even sometimes ask these questions, because I would imagine in Lancaster as well, there's quite a few people here that actually are part of the society and part of the community. So I'm not quite sure why we ask these questions sometimes, but that was what we was asking at the European Parliament. And Douglas Murray decided that he, on the first chance he was going to get, he was going to try and undermine my research. And so they asked a question, and he said, Islamophobia doesn't exist. It's a crock term. It's nonsense. It's political correctness, you know, pandering to a community that causes problems and troubles for everybody else. And I think that you know, even though I disagree with him, I think he has a point. I think that when we go out into society, if we ask the average person, most people don't believe that Islamophobia is a real thing. Most people think that it's a nice way that Muslim communities can kind of deflect a little bit of criticism, can actually sort of, you know, sort of not answer the questions that some of us want to ask. You know, so I think that it's a key issue that we need to ask. But having said that, you know, for me and from my research, I would say that actually Islamophobia does clearly exist, and this is from the Guardian. This was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, 20th of January, and Baroness Varsi said that Islamophobia is now socially acceptable in Britain. And she said it's passed the dinner table test. Now, what I liked about this was the fact that somebody had actually brought this into the public domain and said it's socially acceptable. Research has been going on since 1997, which says that actually Islamophobia is becoming more and more increasingly socially acceptable in British society. What I liked about this was the fact that Baroness Varsi, with a nice conservative background, decided it was a middle class thing. You know, that it existed in the middle classes, that it was at the dinner table. And one of the really interesting parts of this was that the One Show on BBC contacted me and said, could we do something around this? Could we, and I used their phrase, they said, could we make Islamophobia palatable for a prime-time audience? And so I was like, well, I want to take opportunities, right? You know, I won't turn an opportunity down. I'm thinking, okay, how can we make it palatable? So I get into a conversation with them and they say, can we do a come dine with me special? You know, where we kind of have lots of people around the table and then we cut to the kitchen and we ask them what do they really think about, you know, Islamophobia, and then you go back and you have a discussion, and then we get a Muslim woman who's wearing a headscarf and we'll say to her in the kitchen, are you impressed? Yeah. And I was like, no, I don't fancy that one now. No, you know, like we're you know, a little bit too much, you know, like a little bit, you know, and I just thought to myself, like 10 years of trying to build up a career could be lost in like a 3-minute sketch on a 3-minute thing on the One Show. And I just wondered what they were going to follow that with. You know, you imagine it goes back to the sofa, and I don't know who's on it now, but it used to be Adrian Chiles, and I've just imagined, like, you know, we're talking about Islamophobia, we're talking about, you know, sort of attacks and fire bombs and all this sort of stuff, and suddenly we go back and they go something like, and now Westlife's new single. You know, it just doesn't work for me. So you know, but the thing is, I think what this did was the fact that actually what was good about this was the fact that it kind of made an impact. Somebody in government had said, actually, Islamophobia is now socially acceptable in Britain. But again, of course, there's a lot of people detracting and saying, and the day before Baroness Varsi said this, the Quilliam Foundation, I don't know if all of you know the Quilliam Foundation, lovely organisation, very good research. No, I'm being sarcastic, not very good research at all. And they said that actually we should scrap the term Islamophobia because Islamophobia has been hijacked by the extremists. They use the term Islamists. The Islamists have hijacked the Islamophobia debate. I actually sent them, a communication saying, can you provide me with evidence that the Islamists have hijacked the Islamophobia debate? Because I've been doing this for 10 years and I've not got any evidence whatsoever that actually the Islamists are promoting Islamophobia any more so than raising the issue of what other people are doing. Interestingly, I didn't have any comeback, which is, you know, which for me speaks volumes. But the fact that it got brought into the sort of mainstream of society, I think it was a good thing in terms of that. And we can also look at other stuff as well. You know, people say to me, well, you know, like, where's the evidence? Where's the hard evidence? Where's the data? Where's the statistics? And there's lots of issues that, you know, I mean, things such as hate crime. They're recorded as hate crime, but they tend to be put down as racially motivated. A lot of the kind of low-level stuff, like Muslim women having their headscarf pulled from them, people being abused in the street, that sort of stuff doesn't get reported to the police, you know, because it's too much sort of hassle. So what we can do is we can look at some of this stuff and we can start to build a picture. We can start to get an idea of what's going on in society. So the British Social Attitude Survey, January 2010, so just a year ago, 52%, and this is a highly respected piece of research that's funded by government, that's actually sort of used by government, and it's used to kind of map the trends of the sort of social attitudes in Britain. So 52% of Britons believe that Britain is deeply divided along religious lines. Now, let's be honest, once you start drilling down on this information, on this research, we're not talking about that Britain's divided along lines of Buddhists and non-Buddhists. You know, we're not talking about Britain being divided along Scientologists and non-Scientologists. So you drill down, and it's actually, the perception is, the attitude is that we're divided along lines of Muslims and everybody else. You know, everybody else is in that group, and the Muslims are in another. So 52%, so over half the population feel that we're deeply divided along religious lines. 45% say religious diversity has had a negative impact. Now, again, we're not talking about sort of the Gurdwara or the Mandir or the synagogue or the church or anything along this. We're talking about, again, you drill down in this, and people people have begun to unpack this, and it's actually about Islam. It's about the presence of Islam in Britain that people believe has had a negative impact. 33%, a third of the population, feel cool towards Muslims. I love this. Feel cool. It's like, and it's not in the positive sense. So someone might say, "Wow, that's really cool," but they're not saying like, "Wow, Muslims are really cool." They go, "Oh, it's a nice, easy way of kind of saying, don't really like them, so I'm just a little bit cool about it." There was a few years ago they did another one in the British Social Attitude Survey, and one of the questions was, how do you think your friends feel about something else? And I thought it's this lovely way of trying to find out. It's like that thing on problem pages. It's like, my friend has a problem. It's not really me. I'm asking for somebody else. So 33% feel cool. Greater opposition to Islam than to any other faith in the UK. Most people, and this is an interesting one, most people are willing to limit freedom of speech in an attempt to silence religious extremists. Now, if we talk about the Britishness agenda, if we talk about citizenship agendas, actually what we're talking about there is we're talking about British values. We hear this a lot, government talking about British values. And one of the values that we always uphold is the fact about freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And what we're saying there, when we actually ask the question, most people will actually say, to cut down on extremists, we'll actually sort of take away some of our values. We'll actually restrict some of our values in terms of that. And then 55% would be bothered by a large mosque in their neighbourhood. Only 15% concerned by a large church. So again, the perceptions are, and I'm not saying that this is Islamophobic per se. I'm creating a climate. I'm trying to present a picture of how society feels. So 55% bothered by large. Okay, so YouGov online poll from June 2010, and when we're looking at 58% linked Islam with extremism. So this idea that actually sort of Islam, we can't differentiate between sort of a peaceful strand of Islam and an extremist, more radical, more fundamentalist, whatever word you want to use from the social political lexicon, to the Islamist extreme of Islam, whatever you want. 69% believed it encouraged the repression of women. So these ideas, that are out there, like sort of that it's actually sort of patriarchal, it's kind of misogynist, that it actually oppresses and represses women as well. And then the Islamic Education Research Academy, and what I'm doing here, I'm showing you a variety of different pieces of research. So, some are really respected in government, some are much more from, such as this one, much more community focused in terms of a Muslim organisation actually putting that forward. So try and give you sort of an idea of what goes across. 3/4 of non-Muslims believe Islam has provided negative contributions to British society. Now, again, that fits very well with the kind of 52% in the British Social Attitude Survey that said that it's had a negative impact, negative contribution to British society. So when we start looking at the research, actually, you know, the research has linkages, you know. It's not that one piece is saying one thing and another piece is saying something completely different. Actually, what we're seeing is a linkage between these. 63% did not disagree with the statement Muslims are terrorists. So again, you know, very much in line with the 69% or 68%, whatever it was, in terms of the sort of YouGov opinion poll as well. You know, again, so we're capturing all of this together. We're seeing something which is actually sort of being consistent. 94% agree that Islam oppresses women, so you know that one's significantly higher. And don't forget, this is all in the space of 1 year, so this is not research that we're I'm picking and choosing pieces of research. I'm just looking at research that was undertaken in 1 year and kind of going, okay, let's have a look at that. And then one respondent said, if I had my way, I'd kick them all out of here. You know, this idea, you know, like that, actually, you know, it goes back to the sort of 70s, you know, this idea is send them back to where they belong, you know. I still love that actually when people talk about that. I do a lot around, I teach multiculturalism at the University of Birmingham, and it's always interesting when you come across statements like that. You can find them still now, you know, tell them to go back where they belong. It's like, well, actually we're on 4th generation of being British. Where do they belong? They probably belong back in Birmingham, you know, let's send them back there, you know, this sort of stuff. And you can also send me back to London as well, you know, because as far as I'm never going to be a Brummie. And I say that in Birmingham as well. 4/5 have less and very little knowledge about Islam. You know, so out there as well, very few people really understand, you know. And that throws up an interesting question for Muslim organisations, and I always say this to them, you know, and this is probably the wrong issue to raise in Islam Awareness Week, but Islam Awareness Weeks have been running for a number of years, and actually 4/5 of the population still don't know much about Islam, so you might want to target what you're doing in the future, you know, to try and get, you know, make it a little bit better. So it's yeah. But I think that's what exists out there. There was some research done a few years ago actually that actually said that 3/4 of the population, what they do learn is from the media. So you know, so actually the amount of people that actually like sort of what they know about Islam is actually from the media as well. And so that again sort of really skews the work that you're having to try and do. You have to try and counter a lot of this. Okay, and so in terms of research evidence as well, you know, and I'm just doing a very quick sort of scan of 10 years, you know, Home Office research, 2001, hostility and violence were very real concerns for organisations representing Muslims. The situation had worsened. This research came out before 9/11. So, you know, people, you know, so Muslim organisations were saying for their communities, the situation has worsened, and this was Home Office report in 2001. EUMC, European Union Monitoring Centre for Racism and Xenophobia. This was the research that I did for the EU after 9/11, published in 2002. A significant rise in attacks on Muslims in the UK. The interesting part of that is that, you know, we talk about sort of, you know, like sort of, you know, the numbers of Muslims in this country. You know, there's been a lot in the media, a lot in the press about the numbers of converts, and it's interesting you've got Leon coming on Thursday night because he'll do a really good presentation. And what we're talking about there is, you know, this idea that the numbers are a problem. Well, actually, after 9/11, if you looked in places such as Luxembourg, where there's, I don't know if anybody's ever been to Luxembourg. Has anyone been to Luxembourg? I've been there as well. It's there's not a massive visible Muslim presence there, you know, like, and you know the Muslims that are there are a handful. There's probably about the equivalent of this row here. This would be like the population of Muslims in Luxembourg, and they're invisible, you know, visually invisible. But even so, after 9/11, there was a backlash against the Muslims in Luxembourg. So it didn't matter about the visibility. It didn't matter about headscarves, about niqabs, about beards or any of that stuff. You know, wherever you went after 9/11 in Europe, there was a backlash against the Muslims, and it didn't matter whether, you know, as I say, whether that community was big or small. Even in places like Finland, where there was like a sort of very ethnically sort of indigenous Muslim group, again they become targets because of this. So you know, so this was a reality. 2005, Open Society Institute, 80% of Muslim respondents reported being subjected to Islamophobia. And then last year, the European Muslim Research Centre based at the University of Exeter, anti-Muslim hate crimes are confined to the margins, but have increased dramatically during the last decade and have a debilitating impact on victims, families, friends and neighbours. Now, on these last 2 points here, we're talking about Islamophobia. What do we mean by that? Well, you know, people say, well, what do you mean? You know, like, and I did a program for Channel 4 a few years ago, dispatches. I refuse to do dispatches now, just in case anyone is concerned. But it was with Keen Malik, and Keen Malik was an anti-racist, anti-racism campaigner, very vociferous in the 70s and the 80s in looking at sort of minority rights. But he actually said that Islamophobia, you know, like, how can you say that Islamophobia exists? Where's the evidence for this? And I remember having this conversation with him, and I said to him, like, you know, well, you know, a lot of this stuff is actually what goes on at the street level. You know, it's a kid in a school, a Muslim kid being called Osama. You know, it's a Muslim woman being shut in the doors of a bus. You know, which is, and mate, you'll be surprised how many incidents of that we actually get reported. Muslim women, visibly identifiable Muslim women, being repeatedly shut in bus doors. I don't know why that's the case, but we get a lot of that reported to us. You know, and it goes from that. You know, it goes from all those sort of things. You know, like those sort of ideas. You know, right the way through to arson attacks on mosques, right the way through to murders, attacks, physical assault. And Keenan Malik said to me, he said, well, how can that be a problem? How many people have died since 9/11 because of Islamophobia? And I thought, so what a ridiculous statement that is to make. You know, we can only judge if Islamophobia is a problem when people start to die. You know, what a ridiculous sort of thing that is. And so, you know, so when we talk about this, I'm talking at everything, you know, like we're talking, you know, the research here, we're talking about everything, from that very low level stuff, you know, the stuff that goes on at the street, the pushing, the shoving, the name calling, the abuse that's being there, right the way through to the violent assault, the murder, the attacks, and the firebomb attacks. So, you know, so it's a big thing. It's a big thing for us to try and understand in terms of that. So, just what are people afraid of? And I think that's the question. You know, so in the first part, hopefully I've tried to convince you very quickly and very briefly that actually there is something out there that exists. You know, you may want to call it Islamophobia, you may not. You may be from the Quilliam Foundation and want to talk about it being something else. But there's something out there that exists, you know, that actually feeds into what's going on in society at the moment. So what are people afraid of? Well, I think that there's a number of things that we need to look at in terms of this, and I think that we can't detach ourselves from the media. And I'm not a big one to bash the media. I think that we can all bash the media, and you know, we can give we can all say, oh, the media is terrible, it presents a skewed image, but it does that with everybody. You know, it does that with all different groups of people, and that's not to justify it, but that's just to say that it does it with lots of different people and lots of different groups. If any of you remember the thing down in Plymouth a few years ago, was it last year or the year before, when there was the nursery nurse who was abusing children, and then it was the big outcry in the news because of the fact it was a woman who was a female child abuse, and then for a few weeks we had a number of stories about female child abusers, and then it kind of died off. The difference over in terms of Islam and Muslims is it's not died off. You know, it's been there for more than a decade, you know, and it seems to be there. So you know, so in a way, you know, we have to understand this as being a part of this is what the media does, but also we also have to kind of put that into context and say that actually it does feed into people's perceptions. So I've just got here a couple of front pages for you, just to show that it goes right across the board as well. I want to see flag of Allah flying over Downing Street. I wonder, was that a day when there wasn't much news on? Because that doesn't seem like front page news to me. Someone from, it says there, Muslim judge insists all British women be forced to wear burqas. Now that's being reported as if that's actually a reality. Now, actually, no British woman is being forced to wear a burqa. So it's a complete nonsense of a story. Some organisation has produced a press release. It fits in with something else that a newspaper wants to do, so it's a nonsense story. If I said that if I put a press release out tomorrow saying people gathered at the University of Lancaster last night insisted that all British women have to dye their hair green, it wouldn't be reported on the front of the Evening Standard in London. I can guarantee that. You know. Muslims tell British go to hell. So we've got the Evening Standard, now we've got the Daily Express, and you know. Ran in court, a student who tried to kill MP is jailed for life. Again, you know, is that front page news? Maybe the attempt to kill an MP is a front page news, but that they're told the British go to hell? I don't know. And it's interesting as well for me, I'm big on looking at the kind of stories and the way things are set out and everything. And in the top right hand corner you've got the Remembrance Day little poppy. And those sort of things, you know, there's been a lot of associations with sort of, you know, like sort of our heritage, our history, we fought for our freedoms, and Muslims don't want those freedoms. So I don't know, I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into that. That's what you get for doing it for 10 years. Daily Express, 113,000 aid to fanatics who want to kill us. Scandal of government grant. I can't believe that the government's giving grants of that size to anybody anymore, you know. I'd love to have that sort of grant for some research. But again, you know, like the people that are reading this, you know, this is front page news. You know, this is like, people are seeing this, you walk into a shop, you see it there, you know, a number of newspapers, different headlines, you know, and it's like, is this news? I'm not really sure. BBC put Muslims before you, you know, it's, you know, and I love this little image. Can everyone see that? The little image there. This is a brilliant image. Like, I love this, and I think that image, if you see the full image of that, it's one of the best images I've seen. And basically, what it was after some of the terror raids in Birmingham a few years ago, the press kind of descended on Birmingham, and it was like a media circus. And, the image is great because, you know, when you're talking about sort of, you know, like sort of integration and Britishness and are Muslims part of British culture and this and that, and this image there, that you can just see where it says exclusive. It's not exclusive, that image has been used as. And it's this brilliant image of 3 Muslim women all walking down the street pushing prams. And the woman in the middle is wearing the niqab, and she actually does, I realise there's some kids here, so, but actually does this to the camera. And I just thought to myself, what a beautiful British image that is. You know, like the sign of adopting British culture. You know, 2 fingers up at the press. You know, up yours. You know, oh, and sorry, up yours to the microphone as well. So bear with me. You know, and I thought that there was a real irony to that. Was the fact that, you know, this image was actually being used to suggest that these people were part of our culture, but actually it was showing that actually they were fully part of our culture. They knew exactly what to do with someone who was sticking a camera in their face, you know. So you know, but again, the media, you know, creating this, and then the Daily Star again, in between stories of Jordan and Kate, we get Muslim thugs aged just 12, in knife attack on Brit schoolboy, and you know this idea, you know, this differentiation, Muslim thugs, Brit schoolboy, you know. This idea, you know, like the difference, you know, separation, the two, I like that, always at each other. Never like, can they be together? So as I say, you know, I don't blame the media, but the media feeds into and gives us that kind of understanding that where we are. And this was some research I did for the Greater London Authority back in 2007. And when you actually see this is where it kind of shows actually how, you know, the things have actually begun to sort of become very much embedded in our sort of culture. The report was called Search for Common Ground, Muslims, Non-Muslims in the UK Media. What we did at the start of the year was we said, right, okay, we're going to look at a normal week. What does a normal week look like? And the only way we could get a normal week was because if we waited to the start of the week, you know, we didn't know, we could have been going, oh, we're not going to do that week. So we picked a week. It was the week starting the 2nd Monday in May. And we picked this week out of the front, out of the start. And what we did, we bought every national newspaper, Monday to Sunday. We went through every single article and we looked at it. And every time there was Muslims mentioned, Islam, there was a story about mosques or Islamists or terrorists or, you know, any of these sort of things, we actually marked this down and recorded all this. And over that period of a week, 352 articles were about Islam and Muslims, so in that normal week. And when I say, you know, the interesting thing about this week was that there was no big stories that involved Muslims. So there wasn't any terror raids, there wasn't any court cases. The biggest story that week was when Prince Nazim, was it Prince Nazim the boxer? When he got convicted of, actually it was up here somewhere, wasn't it? He actually overtook somewhere and he killed someone head on in his car. Everyone's looking at me completely blankly. Yeah, someone just say yes. Good. Right. Someone remembered it. Yeah, but it was Prince Nazim, and that was the only story, and they were saying that Prince Nazim was a Muslim boxer. Yeah, so that was it. When we looked at this research, there was research done by Elizabeth Paul in 1996, and she looked at the sort of the levels of stories, the numbers of stories that were about Muslims in Islam, and she found, and from using hers as baseline, and then looking at what we were finding just over a decade on, that was a 260% increase. So even in a normal week, the amount of stories about Islam and Muslims had increased by 260%. When we looked at those stories as well, we kind of looked, are they sort of positive? Are they promoting a kind of nice fluffy image of Islam? Are they promoting a sort of very negative derogatory sort of image of Islam? And 91% of that was negative. And 60% of all that together was about terrorism, war, or violence. You know, so Muslim thugs, Muslim gangs, you know, about terrorism plots, you know, sort of ricing, you know, like all these sort of things which were going on there. And internationally, more and war. And it said Muslims are being identified and configured as challenging all that we are understood to be, challenging our culture, our values, institutions, and way of life. It is common sense that no common ground between Muslims and non-Muslims exists or can exist. And so when we see that there, that issue around it being common sense, that's really very much what Baroness Farsi was saying. This idea that it's kind of acceptable, you know, it's actually okay to say it. People don't question that sort of thing. You know, and that actually, you know, like sort of, that the common ground between the two different groups, you know, doesn't really exist, you know, that they're kind of separate and always will be in terms of that.